Sleep paralysis is a phenomenon that all cultures around the world experience. Some believe it to be the work of a succubus, a demon that takes the shape of a beautiful female and visits you at night, leaving you breathless, paralyzed, and terrified. People have different experiences, whether encountering a woman figure, a child figure, or just a dark shadow. Whatever it is, it's always an unforgettable experience. One of those nights, I couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned in my bed, gazing at the city lights pouring through my window, waiting for sleep to embrace me, but it never did. I stared at the alarm clock, and the time dragged on. 12:35, 1:14, 1:30, 2:16. Seconds felt like hours. Frustration built as I struggled to find a comfortable position. I stared at the ceiling, drifting off with my thoughts, pondering ifs and whens. It dawned on me that my persistent late-night habits had left a mark on my mind. I rolled onto my side, and finally, sleep took hold of me. The clock struck 3 o'clock. I was in a light slumber, still aware of my surroundings. I found myself in a vivid dream, a third-person perspective, watching from above, feeling my presence. The setting was the Arizona desert, with the sun scorching the red earth and heat waves dancing in the distance. A tan jeep was visible, following a faint trail left by other tourists. I sensed the presence of a girl in the jeep, exuding happiness. Her joy was infectious, and I found myself smiling. She laughed, joked, and relished life. Although I couldn't see her in the dream, I somehow knew what she was doing. Suddenly, her laughter ceased, and her presence faded away, replaced by a negative energy. The girl began to choke, gasping and struggling. Panic gripped me. My concern for her was genuine. I felt an urge to scream, "No, stop hurting her!" I sensed the presence of a man, and the sounds of choking and gasping intensified. The dream imagery dissolved, and my mind became alert and awake. Chills ran down my spine as I lay in a dark room, the sounds of the girl's choking and gasping still echoing in my mind, growing louder. I heard it inside my head, next to the vibrations in my eardrums. I shut my eyes and curled into a tight ball under the blankets, but a vision formed under my eyelids, one I had not intended. I saw my dark room. My fear intensified as I saw a dark figure forming in the corner. I sensed a female presence, saw the contours of her face, her dark eyes, and pale skin. She looked at me with an awful grin, and the sound of the girl choking stopped. Silence enveloped the room, and I was too terrified to open my eyes. You might think I was dreaming, but no. I know that everything that happened was real. I was awake throughout the experience, and it left me shaking. My heart rate slowed, and a sense of calm finally washed over me, but I still couldn't bring myself to open my eyes. Moments later, I had an unforgettable experience. A sudden and overwhelming wave of intensely negative energy entered my room and settled on my bed, right next to me. I felt it with every hair on my body, as if it were electric sparks against my skin, leaving goosebumps and chills. Then, the energy formed a cloud that wrapped itself around my body from head to toe. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I couldn't make a sound. I realized I was paralyzed and understood what was happening. Fear consumed me as the energy felt incredibly negative, like the atmosphere in a room where two peoples are arguing or fighting. It was a malevolent energy. Moments passed until I felt it recede, retreating into its corner and disappearing. I lay in bed, eyes shut, curled in a fetal position, clutching my blanket tightly. My brain, at the worst possible time, remained on high alert, heightened to every sound and vibration around me. I couldn't sleep for another 2 hours. Following morning, I finally mustered the courage to open my eyes. The morning sun's rays greeted me, dancing across my walls. The light filled me with a sense of safety and relaxation. It was as if my room was apologizing for the events of the previous night. This is a story my uncle shared from their time living in Laos. They attended a Hmong funeral, and in those days, they placed the body in a straw hut house because there were no funeral homes. The deceased was positioned in a bed on one side of the wall while the rest of the family and friends gathered in the remaining space. Hmong funerals typically lasted for 7 days to allow everyone to attend for both practice and spiritual reasons. Weird occurrences began on the second day. Late at night, after everyone had gone to sleep, only my uncle, my grandpa, and another Hmong man remained awake. They could hear people outside, which was unusual given the late hour. Then, a hand pushed through the straw wall, slowly reaching towards the body. My grandpa reacted, grabbing a Hmong knife ready to strike the intruding hand. However, just as he approached, one of the daughters woke up and scolded in Hmong. "Mom, aren't you embarrassed?" She quickly returned to sleep, and the hand retreated. The next day, my grandpa shared the incident with everyone, and that night, nobody slept near the body except for close family members. On the fourth night, a family from another village arrived with their daughters. These girls slept in a separate room and were talking to someone through the walls, a common practice in Laos for boys to communicate with girls. They engaged in conversation for some time until one of the sisters wanted to see who they were talking to. She moved some of the straw wall aside and screamed, waking everyone up. She claimed it was a monster talking to them, a man with a sheep's head. All of the men rushed outside, released the dogs, and chased the entity, but no matter how fast they ran, it outpaced them, even outrunning the released dogs. On the fifth day, everyone wanted to bury the body, even though it was only the fifth day and the norm was to do so on the seventh. After family discussions, they decided to bury the body that day. Several weeks later, the eldest son of the deceased, who was a good friend of my grandpa, paid a visit. He told my grandpa that they had been hearing noises inside the house at night, such as pots and pans clanging and objects moving. Suspecting a potential thief, they decided to stay awake that night to catch the intruder. As they hid behind the door, it grew late, and they started to doze off. Suddenly, the door slowly creaked open. 2 men jolted awake, grabbing the bamboo sticks that they had been holding and struck the figure's back. Both of them broke their bamboo sticks across the figure's back, and the intruder managed to escape. They released the dogs and chased it, yet once again, they couldn't catch up even after breaking 2 bamboo sticks across its back. Several days later, one of the daughters from the house had a dream. In the dream, she saw her deceased mother, who told her that she missed the family and wanted to come home at night to help clean and wash pots and pans. However, her son had been cruel and had broken her back with a bamboo stick. She vowed never to return home. After this dream, the mysterious noises they had been hearing ceased. This is a story about my personal experience that happened to me over the last 9 years of my life. I have heard many stories about encounters with ghostly boyfriends or girlfriends, but it didn't matter to me, and I didn't really care about it until I experienced it firsthand. I have been living in Sheboygan, Wisconsin for 17 years, approaching 18 now. When I was only 12 years old, a friend of my sister pushed me into the Sheboygan River while we were fooling around. Looking at the area where I was pushed, it appeared shallowed and filled with rocks. However, when I fell in and disappeared into the river, I realized something was holding onto my foot. My sister reached in to save me, and when she pulled me out, 3 little rocks were pressed right onto my foot, but I wasn't bleeding. After the incident, I couldn't walk for 3 weeks, but eventually I healed and could walk again. 2 years later, we had a picnic at Evergreen Park with family and cousins. While on a walk to Maywood, I took photos along the way. My cousin's hand began bleeding and my camera unexpectedly died when we passed an area with pine trees. Later, when we watched a video I had recorded, we saw a little girl walking behind my cousin and then disappearing. Additionally, in one of the photos from Maywood, there was a handsome young man in all white with 2 men in black behind him. My aunt saw this photo and she asked who the men were, but I didn't remember taking it. I was then told to delete all the photos with the man in white. 3 weeks later, I fell seriously ill and couldn't attend school. A shaman was consulted and it was suggested that a dragon prince had fallen in love with me and the 2 men in black were his servants. The shaman mentioned that my spirit had fallen deep into something and couldn't come up, which is when the dragon prince found me. To remedy this, my parents were instructed to tie colored strings on my wrist, but they only used a white one. When I was able to attend school the next day, I fell ill again, and the shaman performed a ceremony with multiple colored strings. Strangely, all the strings vanished a week later. My sister's husband prayed for my recovery and I got better. Everything seemed fine until I was 15 and talking to my friend. I heard a strange voice saying that it would love me more than my ex-boyfriend. My friend denied saying anything, and this gave me chills. On Thanksgiving weekend, I was left alone while sick and couldn't get up, but nothing was found at the ER. The shaman explained that my spirit was weak, and something my parents had said made my spirit sad, leading to my illness. That night, the spirit came and tried to take me, leading to a terrifying experience. A shaman performed a ritual to block the spirit. Things were relatively calm until we found strange photos of me on my sister's phone when I was 16. The shaman explained that my spirit had merged with another and suggested a spiritual separation, but my parents didn't act upon it. From the 12th to the 18th of every month, I would get sick, sometimes bleeding from my mouth and nose. I could see the mysterious guy and feel his presence next to me every night. Recently, my grandmother passed away, and her spirit kept returning. A black cat would appear and call my name, then run away when my sister saw it. The shaman had insisted on the separation ritual multiple times, but my parents didn't agree. Eventually, the shaman took matters into her own hands and changed my name without performing the ritual. Friends and family now call me by a different name near water or in the woods, but at home they still use my birth name. That spirit is still out there somewhere, searching for me. But for now, the spiritual name change is protecting me. I heard this story way back then and have since shared it with numerous people, spooking them out, especially during camping trips. It's fall in the Midwest, and the leaves have turned to beautiful red and yellow shades, ready to carpet the forest floor. If you guys are out early on a deer hunting trip, armed with radios, they set off on their own paths. This strategy increases their chances of a successful hunt, as they always share the spoils among themselves. As the day draws to a close, there hasn't been a deer in sight for the men. While they were discussing whether to head home early over the radio, one of the guys suddenly tells everyone to hush. The other men wait in utter silence, barely daring to breathe as they know that their friend has spotted a deer. Suddenly, the thunderous roar of a 7mm rifle cuts through the air, followed by a second shot. The radio crackles, and his voice calmly says, "I think I got him." The shooter goes to locate his kill, while the others make their way to help. The trek back to the car is quite a hike, mostly uphill, so they'll have to divide the load to carry it. It was a close call, and they almost went home empty-handed. Radio communication resumes as they exchange information on direction and speculate about the size of the kill. The shooter radios back, indicating that he could not find the deer and is still searching. It takes only about 15 minutes for everyone to regroup. By this time, it's starting to get dark and they know they will soon need to use flashlights. They return to the shooter's location and head in the direction where the deer was shot. As they look in the area, the men hear a faint sound. Some of them stop to listen, trying to discern what it might be. It sounds like someone is talking or singing. As they move further from the shooting site, the sound becomes louder. By now, they unmistakably recognize the sound as someone singing a Hmong folk song, Lucia. They all look at each other with wide eyes, their hearts pounding loudly enough to be heard. Then, the singing suddenly stops. Shaken and scared, they decided to abandon the search for the deer. They are no longer concerned about losing the deer. Their primary focus is getting into the car and heading home. However, the tall grass and thick shrubs make it difficult to exit quickly, and running is out of the question as they don't want to provoke anything. With darkness setting in, they retrieve their flashlights. Just as they are about to leave, they spot a dark shape illuminated by their flashlights in the tall grass near an oak tree. They decided to approach it, hoping it's a deer. Perhaps if it is, they can quickly retrieve it and be on their way. As they get closer to the figure, their eyes widen in disbelief. They gasp for a breath and pause, their hearts beating even harder than before. Lying in front of them is the deer the one guy shot, but it's wearing Hmong clothes. I've been chatting with this girl online for a few nights now, and I finally found the courage to ask her out. She lives in the neighboring state, which is a 6-hour drive, so I decided to head out on a Friday night. It's not the first time I've driven out that way by myself. It's a common drive and I have family there, but I didn't want anyone to know that I was coming. I figured I'd get a room, meet this person, and be back home before Sunday. I told my parents that I was going to spend the night at a friend's house. I had it all planned out. On Friday night, after work, I filled up my car and hit the road. I was excited to meet this girl, so nothing was going to bring me down. I'd been on the highway for almost 5 hours when it started to rain really hard. Just my luck. My windshield wipers didn't work that well, and I could barely see the road. I drove a few more miles before I pulled into a hotel that looked safe and friendly, and I got a room. It was your typical room with a bed, window, television, desk, and a bathroom. As I went to use the bathroom, I noticed that someone had left a brush by the sink, probably a previous traveler's mistake. I changed into my shorts and lay down on the bed. I was tired, so it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. I was sleeping when a thumping noise woke me up. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway. I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. Then I heard it again, but this time the sound came from the bathroom, like someone dropped something. I turned away to face the window and pretended that I didn't hear it. I looked at the time. It was 3:20 a.m. As I tried to sleep, I heard footsteps. They were inside the room. I got goosebumps as the footsteps got closer. I felt a chill and it got really cold. My heart started beating faster and I was scared. I could see a shadow floating towards the window. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but the shadow was like a gray fog. At this point, it didn't matter. I was paralyzed with fear. I stayed still, pretending to be asleep, hoping it would go away. And it did. But I couldn't sleep after that. I was up all night and couldn't wait for the sunrise to come. I remembered someone saying that if you pretend not to see them, they won't see you. I was hoping that it was true as I acted like nothing happened and left quickly and quietly. When I got into my car, I double-checked the back seat and looked in the rearview mirror several times to make sure that there was nothing there. I let out a breath of relief. Nothing. I drove off and stopped at a fast food restaurant to get some breakfast. It was still too early to call the girl, so I texted her instead. I figured I would kill some time by playing games on my phone when an elderly lady came over and asked me, "Excuse me, son, but you left this on the counter." She handed me something. No ma'am, that's not mine," I replied. I looked down and it was the same brush from the hotel. I can recall this memory as vividly as if it were a recorded episode of my life, one I could watch over and over again. This tale is not exactly scary, but it's a paranormal and ghostly experience that happened to me. When I was around 4 or 5 years old, I had just met one of my aunt's best friends and her friend's husband. At that time, I was the only girl among my cousins, as the rest were boys around my age, with the oldest being 4 years older than me. On the very first day we met, the husband instantly became our favorite uncle. I remembered him hanging out with all the boys, playing basketball while I stood a few feet back, watching them. They were having fun playing, and he noticed me standing alone watching them. He stopped and asked if I wanted to join, but I declined and said no. So I continued to stand there and observe them. Then he asked if I wanted to get some ice cream at Dairy Queen, to which I eagerly replied yes. Subsequently, all the boys wanted to go too, but his small sedan car couldn't accommodate all of us, so they decided I couldn't join, which was a common occurrence. They usually left me behind. I could tell that he wanted me to go since the boys often didn't want me around, but he promised that I could come with him next time. A couple of weeks later, I overheard my parents talking about someone who was going to die. It turned out that it was the uncle I had recently met. Only a short time had passed, around 2 to 3 weeks since our first meeting. He had been driving to the farm with his wife when he suddenly experienced a severe headache, causing him to swerve into a ditch. Although his wife was unharmed, he fell into a coma due to a brain aneurysm or a blood clot. I was too young to fully understand. He remained in the hospital for another 2 weeks, but eventually his family decided it was too expensive to keep him on life support, as the doctors believed he had little chance of recovery. Consequently, they removed him from the life support, and he passed away. At his funeral, it was my very first experience with a Hmong funeral. Back then, I had no understanding of Jatsia, so my parents simply told me it was a place to visit the deceased. I couldn't believe he was really gone, considering that I had only met him not long ago. I felt sadness because he had promised to take me to Dairy Queen, even though I didn't dwell on it. Dairy Queen became a reminder of him and my cousins. At the funeral, I could see him from a distance, resting in his casket. I wanted to approach him, but I was scared. I'd never seen a dead person before, so I hesitated. His wife offered to hold my hand and asked if I wanted to see him. I initially said yes. However, as we walked towards him, fear overcame me and I withdrew my hand, shaking my head in refusal. She smiled and chuckled a little, telling me it was okay. A few weeks later, I continued thinking about him. One night, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night and gazed around the room I shared with my brother, puzzled as to why I had awakened for no apparent reason. Although I was still young, my spirit and mentality were more mature due to being the oldest. This was a new experience for me, as I had never woken up without cause. As I looked up at the ceiling, I sensed a presence. A man in a fine tuxedo standing near the door. I realized he wasn't real because he appeared almost ethereal, transparent, and see-through. Sitting up, I blinked repeatedly, but he remained there. I began to scream, but no sound emerged. Even though I screamed, kicked, and gripped my throat, wondering why there was no sound, It was like someone had pressed the mute button. It was as though my vocal cords had been paralyzed. Panicking, I rapidly covered myself and my face with my blanket for what felt like an hour, though it was likely only a minute. Slowly, I removed the blanket and saw that the transparent figure was now approaching me. I screamed even louder and felt intense fear. I screamed until it felt like my brain was aching. As he came closer and closer, he was now standing in front of me. To my surprise, I realized it was the same uncle that I had met. His face remained the same. Strangely, as I looked at him, all my fear disappeared. I slowly laid back down and looked at him. He began talking, but as before, it was like the mute button had been pressed and I couldn't hear him. I tried to understand what he was saying, but I heard nothing. He gestured as he spoke, but I was saddened because I couldn't grasp his message or why he seemed sad. After about a minute, he got up, tucked me in, waved, and began walking back towards the door. I watched him leave, and that was the last time I ever saw him. The following day, I hesitated to tell my mom, fearing she might think I was a liar. Eventually, I mustered the courage to share that the recently departed uncle had visited me the previous night. To my surprise, my mom remained silent and her face turned pale with wide eyes. She explained that the night he had visited me, she awoke to a strong, repugnant odor, something akin to the stench of a deceased person. My mom inquired about the smell, and when I recounted my experience, she listened intently. Perhaps he had come back to apologize for not being able to take me to Dairy Queen. This day, I still try to remember how his lips moved, hoping to one day understand his message. I hope he has found peace in paradise. Rest in peace. This incident occurred in 2010 when my husband and I were working as managers at an apartment complex. We had just been promoted to manage a 2,000 plus unit complex. Both of us had always experienced unexplained phenomena and vivid dreams from a young age. I am a very religious person, a shaman, while my husband leans towards atheism. Before our promotion, we worked as assistant managers in the adjacent complex. We had heard stories that these complexes were built on Native American burial grounds, but the truth of this claim remains uncertain. After we took office, we gradually moved into our apartment, located upstairs from our office. As we got to know our staff, we gave out our personal cell phone numbers. Our apartment was quite spacious as it was reserved for the managers. It had 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. We chose the master bedroom, which had a large door opening to the patio, a spacious ensuite bathroom with 3 closets, 2 sinks, a shower, and a bathtub with a jacuzzi. We were excited about our promotion in our new place. At that time, my oldest daughter was 3 years old and slept in her room in her own toddler bed. One night, as we were getting into bed, I turned off our lamp and climbed into bed. However, I suddenly felt the need to use the bathroom. Just before I reached for the bathroom door handles, I heard a loud bang, and I quickly ran back to bed and asked my husband if he heard it too. I felt relieved when he confirmed that he heard it as well. My husband was somewhat scared, but my curiosity and anger led me to investigate. Both my husband and I got up and turned on the bathroom lights. We checked every closet and inspected our shampoos and bathroom accessories. Nothing appeared to have fallen or have been moved. In one of our closets, there was a small door leading to the attic and other electrical areas of the apartment. My husband quickly opened it, but there was nothing inside. We shrugged it off and went back to sleep. Over the next couple of days, I received numerous phone calls from unknown and blocked numbers. Knowing that these were blocked numbers, I never answered them, as I believed that important calls would leave messages. The mysterious calls continued for several days until one day, a voicemail was left. I assumed it was from one of my credit card companies, as I was behind on payments, and would often call as unknown before leaving a message. It was just 30 minutes before my office closed, and I decided to check my voicemail. However, when I listened to the message, it was not what I expected. Instead of a recorded message about my late payment, I heard heavy breathing. This unexpected experience startled and scared me, prompting me to erase the message immediately. I told myself that someone was probably playing a prank on me and brushed it off. The calls from unknown numbers continued for the next few days, and I was intrigued to find out who was calling. Once again, I received another message with heavy breathing. However, I was scared and turned to my husband for reassurance. He suggested it might be a prank caller or a wrong number. My parents typically babysat my daughter, and after work, I went to pick her up. Just as I arrived at my parents' house, I received another missed call. I listened to the voicemail and, yet again, heard heavy breathing. I quickly erased it before entering my parents' house. I shared what had been happening with my father, and he, like many older people, dismissed it as nothing serious. My dad thought that someone was probably playing games with me. My mom wasn't home at that time, so I couldn't tell her what was going on. The following day, after work, my mom came by with a couple of red strings. My mom is a shaman. She asked about what was happening, as she heard from my dad. I shared the story with her, and she immediately went upstairs to our apartment. She addressed whatever presence might be there, asserting that the apartment was our home, as we were living and working here. My mom tied the red strings to every door in my apartment and had me place dried peppers inside the small door in the bathroom closet, as well as in other guest rooms we weren't using. My mom explained that the entity had moved into our apartment after the previous managers left. It was unhappy that we had moved in and had settled inside the small attic door in our bathroom because it was darker in there. The night we heard the loud bang, it intended to scare us, but since we remained calm, it started calling me on my phone. We had verbally provided our cell phone numbers to our staff, and when I didn't pick it up, it began leaving messages telling me to leave. After my mom performed her ritual, we no longer experienced anything strange.